Yeah, my name is David Flatt. I'm Executive Director at Imagine Museum in St. Petersburg. It is the leading contemporary glass art museum basically in the world. So we have a collection of over 5,000 pieces of glass art, and we only show about 500 pieces at a time, so about 10% of the collection. It's on Central Avenue. Have any of you ever been there before? Okay, so most of you have been there. Very good. Now it changes quite a bit, and actually in this past year I did add another gallery. I've been there 2 years, but it's the fourth museum that I've been executive director of, and I've been working in museums since I was a teenager, and also had done archaeology since I was a teenager. So kind of my connection through there. So this is the building, of course, and last year we set a record on attendance at the museum, and then we're also on record pace this year. A big thing that I've done since I've been there is add a lot of different events. So the year before I got there, I think they had like 5 events for the year. Last year we had 100, and this year we had over 100. So a lot of different artist lectures, presentations. We have art demos. Like if you go to our art market, which we have one coming up on this Friday, you'll see live glass blowing, you'll see flame working, you'll see other artists that are out doing live demonstrations. And in fact, any artist who's doing a live art demonstration, I give a free spot to during the show so they can have a chance to demonstrate their art for the public. So it's really a community-based event. But another thing I did is brought in some new galleries. I did a collaboration with Comic Con and MetroCon and did a glass display of anime and comic book art, including some of the top comic book artists in the United States are part of that. And that brought in thousands of people just to the opening weekend of that event. So what I'm going to talk about today is more from my archaeological background and how it connects to glass. Now, I did archaeology in the United States, in Europe. I was in Malta, Netherlands, and then in Southeast Asia, in Thailand. So I was an archaeologist, or I was active in field archaeology for over 20 years. I still do some research for archaeology as well, but primary job is with the museums, being director. And I started off doing field work and then doing lab work and doing museum exhibitions, and gradually that led to me being curator of different museums to where I became executive director. I did run a windmill museum in Nebraska, and then I was in charge of the first, it was the Ford factory in Detroit. It's called Piquette. And I turned that actually into the #1 ranked event venue in the state of Michigan for weddings. And then I went from there to California Automobile Museum, and then to the Glass Museum. Now you might wonder how I went from car museums to an art museum. So in archaeology, my background was in ceramics analysis, and then I do some metal artwork as well. So I always had a close connection with that. But when I was doing archaeology, besides ceramics, you run into a lot of glass. So I had worked with glass and curation of glass for many years before I came to the museum. And then I also did a lot of art events at these other museums. Like I did an Art of Low Riding event in California. I did a Power of Wind art show in Nebraska, whereas originally it was going to be about windmill art, but then ended up being about kind of just renewable energy as far as wind power. So that became very popular, and that's still an art show that's going on today. So that's kind of my connection to the arts. So I'll go ahead and go into the slides. I have quite a few slides. I'm going to talk about some of the different cultures that use glass. And then I have a few videos if I have time to get to them at the end. So the mission statement is to inspire, educate, and uplift for the museum. So through our carefully curated and immersive displays, we endeavor to inspire, uplift, and educate you in the art of glass and creative artists who have masterfully established contemporary glass art movement. So in the words of the museum's founder, Miss Trish Duggan, the one material that has had the greatest impact on shaping the world as we know it is glass. From the lenses we wear on our faces to the glass fiber optic cables making global internet possible. One of my purposes is to elevate glass from the commonplace to the extraordinary. And then she's the one who collected a lot of the glass that's now on display in the museum. And that is one of the big differences from Imagine Museum, is that you're going to see glass from all over the world. We have pieces on display from over 100 different international artists. So we're not focused on, say, just one artist, like you would see at the Chihuly, which is also a great museum, but they focus on the one artist. And that's why, because the exhibits are always changing, like every Monday I'm changing something, maybe a few pieces, maybe a whole gallery. That each visit you're going to see something new when you come in there. So it's not a static museum like some museums you will go to. So how did it all begin? So a meteorite hit Earth roughly 25 to 30 million years ago. So it hit in the Libyan desert. You see there? And what it did is it created a virtual sea of glass when it hit. So grains of silica and sand naturally fuse in the desert under temperatures of around 3,000 degrees when this hit. And once cooled down, it made a huge layer of glass. So it was basically a lake of glass that occurred. So the temperature then when it hit would have been hotter than lava, so over 3,000 degrees. So a piece of this glass was brought to market and sold to an Egyptian merchant. And then what he did is he turned this into a scarab beetle brooch. So the part in the middle here, that's the glass part. You see the little beetle? And that's going to be very important because that ties into a major archaeological find. So in 1922, Egyptologist Howard Carter unearthed that brooch that we just saw in the burial chamber of King Tut. So that was on November 4th, 1922. So King Tut ruled from 1333 BCE at an age of 9 years until his death in 1323. So not very long, about a decade he was ruling. So after he died, King Tut was mummified and buried in a tomb filled with artwork, jewelry, and other treasures. So there's Howard Carter inside of it. The Egyptian desert quickly hid the tomb, and it lay hidden for more than 3,000 years. So Carter's team first excavated that staircase he was standing on, and then they started to open up some of these other rooms. And here you see a map of King Tut's chamber. And then you can see the picture over there on the side. That includes the artifacts that he would seen. Now they made a breach in that door to that room, and then they opened it up on November 26th. And then after that, they found that sarcophagus he was standing at. So one of the lesser known items found in King Tut's tomb among the priceless artifacts were that brooch that I just showed you a picture of. Now, in the center displayed with what appeared to be a yellow scarab beetle made of glass. While beautiful, archaeologists found that item to be very intriguing because they didn't realize glass had been made that far back up until that point. So that was a very important discovery. And then they did finally figure out that that did come from the Libyan desert from other glass deposits they had found there. So we'll get to this picture here. And this is actually of a hieroglyph of Aten, and we're going to talk a little bit about him. So it was believed the Egyptians were among the first to use glass in their art and culture as far back as 2500 BC. Amulets of solid glass beads were also made in Mesopotamia, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. And then about 1,000 years later, the Egyptians also began making more complicated glass. So we're going to see they start off with a very kind of rudimentary type of glass, and they really refine kind of what they're doing. It's made from a mixture of silica, sand, lime, and soda. So we'll go ahead and start to look at some of these pieces. So this is an ancient Egyptian glass vessel. And here you can kind of get an idea of the kind of the rougher form of when they started making these early pieces. So this would be a much older piece. So pure glass, a separate material in the form of translucent beads, came in the pre-dynastic period. So the Old and Middle Kingdoms, glass jewelry, amulets, animal figures, mosaic stones. And as they go through, this is to the New Kingdom era, they start to get a little bit more fancy. They start to do some designs in it. You can tell the glass is a lot smoother on what they're doing. Now they Really started to do a lot more glass work when they got to King Tut's era. And then when they got to the New Kingdom era, which is what this period is kind of when they reached the height of their glass work. So primarily before that time, they were doing more with beads, but as they got to that New Kingdom area, they started to make more vessels. So they started to use it. And glass was a very kind of valuable substance at that time period, so it was really more for the rich. Now they also used what they would call faience, and that's the glaze that they would put over this glass. And that's why you see a strong resemblance kind of to ceramics when you see that too. And that's a mixture of quartz sand and alkaline substances. A lot of times, like later on especially, it became a tin-based type of glaze they would do. And they would add that to it as they were doing the molding. So we'll get to, this is the later era glass. So now you can see the glass, the quality of it has improved tremendously in Egypt, where you get that translucent clear glass. That's something we take for granted today, but actually at that time period it was very difficult to get it to that state because that means it had a lack of minerals in there, because that's what will color the glass. For example, if you have the mineral cobalt in glass, it's going to make a blue color to it, or manganese will make a purple color. So that's why you see all these different colors in glass. So for them to make that perfectly clear glass was actually a big step for them. But still, it was a relatively rare thing. It was something that was much more for the upper class. Besides glass utilization in amulets, beads, and inlays, attempts were made to use it in more ambitious projects. The ancient Egyptians made method by core forming and cold cutting. So a lot of times if they would make a plate, for example, they would make a mold out of sand and then they would pour the glass into that once they had made it molten. So for ancient Egyptians, glass was regarded as a semi-precious stone, and it was a novelty material. So it was really very rare in Egypt. So you don't see it a lot on Egyptology sites. And it was most likely under the control of royalty and given as presents to favored officials. Okay, so next one we're going to talk about is the culture of Mesopotamia. So this would have been at a similar time period as Egypt, even a little bit earlier in some of the areas for glass production. So glass has always been found in nature, but the first glass created by humans can be dated to about 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. So this would have been the area of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So we're talking about modern day Iraq, Iran, and that area. So the methods used to shape the glass that they were making were with the open molds and casting. Again, this is what I was talking about with the sand cast glass, which is still a technique that's done today as well. And actually a lot of the techniques I'm going to talk about, there's still artists who do those type of techniques. So what they started off making was something very different. So this is a pendant that was cast out of glass. Dates about 1500 BC. Now what's interesting about this is these type of pendants were very common in Mesopotamia, but most of the time they were made out of ceramic. All right, or sometimes you can see them even made out of wood, but glass was very rare that they would make these out of. So this pendant is one of the earliest types of glass found in Mesopotamia, and it may represent the goddess Ishtar or one of her devotees, the Mesopotamian goddess of fertility and abundance. So Ishtar was a popular deity associated with the Greek Aphrodite, so that kind of gives you some reference to it. Now here's a much finer piece that was done in Mesopotamia. This is a portrait of the pharaoh Akhenaten. It's also a mold style casting. So they would have created a mold and then they pour this in. The turquoise glass inlay preserves the image of the pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled during Egypt's 18th dynasty. The pharaoh is shown to profile at the left, and its facial characteristics are subtly molded. In the glass, depict high cheekbones, and then you see the way his neck and his lip. And you see this in Egyptian hieroglyphs a lot, the way that they were kind of over-exaggerate the human form. There was also colored inlays of contrasting colors. So where like the eyebrows are, and there would have been an ear stud there too, they would have actually put another layer of glass on those, is what they likely thought. And then this would have been part of a bigger form. So what they would do, the head, the body, the limbs, they would have made those in different molds, and they would use these in inlays. Oftentimes these would be part of a larger composition that you would put into something like furniture, to make for just kind of fancy relief sculpture. So the best surviving pieces of this type of glasswork, though, would actually have been what was found in King Tut's tomb. And there is a connection between Akhenaten and Tut, because Akhenaten was actually the father of King Tut. And what was interesting about him is that he was very different than a lot of the other pharaohs, and he was a monotheist. He worshipped one god, which was Aten, which was a sun god. And a lot of the people in Egypt, especially the priestly caste, did not like that, and that's why he was removed in favor of King Tut. So what you see a lot from that time period is that, again, that over-exaggerated human form. And then here are some of the core form glass you're going to see, and this is getting into what I was talking about, the different colors. So you can start to see they're using far different colors, getting some of the manganese and cobalt colors you're getting into there, again with some clear form. However, with Mesopotamia, glass would still be considered a very rare item, and that only the rich would be using it. A lot of times it would be also art pieces that would be embellished with glass. And then this is Mesopotamian perfume vessels. So because perfume was so valuable, that would be one of the things that they would use glass containers for. These would usually be relatively small, but highly decorated and very expensive for that time period. Okay, so now we're going to get into the Phoenicians. And you'll see with each one of these cultures, they'll have some similarities, but also some differences on what they're doing with glass. In the Phoenician culture, this is one of the groups that I had a lot of work with on the island of Malta. Malta, in the middle of the Mediterranean, it was actually whoever controlled the Mediterranean controlled Malta throughout kind of history. So what you will see is the Phoenicians. Later on, you'll see the Greeks, the Romans, the Knights of Malta, which were the Knights Hospitaller. Later on, you'll have the French and you'll have the British. And there was a Turkish period as well. So really who was kind of ever in control of the Mediterranean Sea was there. And it made for an interesting work archaeological wise, because you have a lot of multi-component sites. So I worked on sites where sometimes you would have a building and all four walls could be from a different time period. They could have pieces that were taken, say, from an old Phoenician temple, and then they would be put onto a more modern building. I did find kind of Phoenician artifacts on sites that would later be occupied by even the British colonial time period. So a lot of reuse of the stone blocks, but this is very typical of what you will see as far as buildings in Malta. They did build kind of a ring of towers around the island as well. And it's a very interesting place to visit if you ever get the chance. And then I did actually a lot of underground archaeology there because they have a lot of catacombs, and so those also would date to the Phoenician time period. So you're going to see some of the types of pieces the Phoenicians did, and it's derived from Egyptian glassmakers. However, they did improve a lot on the techniques, and we're going to get into more detail about some of these, especially what you're going to see with these necklaces they were making. And again, the perfume jars were popular, amphora jars, because those would be holding valuable substances. So an epic-making event occurred in the second half of the 1st century BC with the discovery of glass blowing. So the Phoenicians would be the first ones we would know to do glass blowing, which is still popular today. And that's what a lot of the glass that you will see at the museum will be blown glass, but definitely not all of it. But that originated, they believe, in the city of Sidon, and that's a Phoenician city-state. So it's now would be the 3rd largest city in Lebanon. So that kind of gives you an idea of where that would be located. Glass blowing was a quick and inexpensive method of glass making as compared to doing the molds. Because the molds, you have to set up the mold and you have to pour it. It was much more time consuming. Glass blowing is tricky to learn, but once they were able to learn it, they could quickly make pieces. Also would use less glass to be able to do that. So that was a major advancement. And here's an example of some of the Phoenician blown glass vessels. And they were able to do a lot more forms too once they get to doing blown glass. And you'll see a lot more cups, a lot more plates, bowls. So remains from a mid-1st century BC glassmaking workshop refuse dump were actually found in the excavations of Jerusalem. Here you're going to see Phoenician decorated glass vessel. This is a more crude one. And here we get into some of their more advanced ones. Now, these are very interesting, the faces, and these are very highly stylized Phoenician pieces. And what they would do, they would have the head pieces on there, and a lot of times they would have the beads with them. And then they found, they're still quite rare, but they did find these at Phoenician sites. So on my sites is more of, you'd see more actually of just the regular bead, so the heads are much more rare. So we'll go to in Jerusalem, and this is Naaman Avantgarde, and he's the one who found the glass-making workshop in Jerusalem. Now, even though there was glass production, the actual finding of the workshops has been kind of rare. This one that he found, they dated it about to 50 BC. And there was two forms of glass objects that they found in Jerusalem, a lot of glass tubes, and then they also found some narrow-necked bottles with spiraling decorations, like what you were seeing in the Phoenician decorations. So we'll now go to the next culture. Okay. So this would be the Greeks. So here you're going to see kind of a marketplace for the Greeks and kind of see all the activity they have going on. So what it is also with glass, when they were doing the cast glass and cast glass, because it was more for wealthy people, and as they start to do the glass blowing, then it starts to become more widely spread among the population. So that's why you see a lot more glass in these cultures as you go up. And then the Greeks improved over what the Phoenicians were doing. So in the 6th century BC, core-formed glass and perfume cosmetic containers became more prevalent throughout the Mediterranean. And here you can see the Greek glass vessels. See like the bird in the front, and you can see kind of the bulbous type tube pieces they were doing. And they get a lot higher craftsmanship as they start to go. But also some things that were artistic as well. Here's a good example of colors with the bowls that they were doing. Again, each one of those containing the different types of minerals to make those colors. So later was the colorless glass, cast in molds and segged over forms and decorated with gilding and cutting. Appears to me a major technical innovation in the late 5th to early 4th century BC. And these are some nice examples of Greek. So a Hellenistic period saw a gradual diversification of forms, expansions of colors, which you're seeing in this photo here, and experimentation with new techniques. Always an important luxury trade good, glass drinking vessels and small objects such as beads and gaming pieces became more accessible to a wider segment of the population. By the beginning of the 1st century BC, an important prelude to the spread of glass blowing under the Roman Empire. Archaeological evidence firmly indicates that primary production of glass as well as glass working took place for the Greeks mostly on the island of Rhodes in the Aegean Sea. So here, see some perfume jar and amphora. What's interesting too is you'll see the penny down there, And that's something you'll see archaeologists do a lot, is they'll have something for reference. Sometimes you'll also see, say like a stick that'll have like black and white colors on it, just so you get an idea of how large something is when they go back to look at the photos. So that's actually the Colossus of Rhodes, which is one of the wonders of the world. And that's where the Greek glasswork would have been centered at. There's an example of an amphora that they found on Rhodes. Now, one of the things they found a lot of on the island of Rhodes was glass beads. So they actually found one site in Camaros, and they found over 6,000 glass beads on that one site. So those were mostly necklace beads, and they think that they might have been offering because there was a temple to Athena in that city. So that's what they think they were doing, and that's why they found so many kind of grouped together, because it was a religious site. So this is one of the best pictures, I think, for glass work, and this would take us to the Roman period, and this is when glass work really kind of come to age. And what's interesting in this picture is you're going to see all these different types of techniques that I've been talking about, and were greatly improved by the Romans. So you'll see like the guy coming down the stairs, he's bringing in supplies that they need to make the glass. You'll see the kiln in the back where they're doing the glass blowing at, and he has the tube. That's still very much the way that they do glass blowing today. And then kind of in front of him, you'll see the people pouring the molten glass into a mold, which is also the way that it's done today. And then the guy with the file in the front, he's doing what you would call cold work. So that's when you would take a finished vessel and you're actually going to be carving into it. So that's a very common technique that's also done still today. So it's very interesting that a lot of these methods and techniques are still done, and the Romans really kind of perfected it over what you've seen. Yeah.
That's a very good picture because it explains a lot. But in the kiln in the back.
Yeah.
Okay, so the guy's coming down with the sand.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then they mix it with what to make?
They're going to mix it with lime.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do they mix it then with some special dirt that would have the manganese or the different?
Yeah. Then they're going to add the minerals to it. Yeah. And there's also a technique as well that's called frit.
Okay.
To where, and that's different types of elements or minerals, okay. And you add that frit to it, and it'll make the colorization to it. So it's all part of the process. As you heat it up, you add the minerals into it.
Then when it's in the kiln, it will harden.
Well, they're going to make it. It'll make it molten when they put it into the kiln, and then what they're doing is they're taking out what they call a gather. Yeah. It'll be a glob of molten glass, and then that piece of molten glass, they either pour it into a mold, or they use that for the glass blowing.
Okay. I thought it was hardened.
No, it's going to be soft as you pull it out. But the thing is, when you take the glass out, you only have about a minute or so to work with it, and it'll be far more pliable at the beginning, and it gets harder and harder as you go. And then what they have to do is once it hardens up to where they can't work it anymore, they put it back on the fire and start to let it heat up again, and then they can work it again until you get it the way you want it.
Because we've seen the glass blowing.
Yeah.
That's familiar with, but the other one. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep, of course. But yeah, that is a really good painting. And here's some of the Roman glass vessels. And so what you're going to see is that they're doing a lot more bottles and cups and plates. And this started to change in making simple glass drinking vessels. So really what you can think of the Roman glass period is much different, is that they start to mass produce. So a lot more glass can be found on Roman sites. They also had some luxury items, but far more utilitarian items. A similar expansion was seen with buildings and using it in glass. And what's interesting, and I'll have a picture of it in a little bit, is that's when you start to see glass windows. Now, not all the buildings had them, but some did, which is interesting because you usually don't see, like from, say if you watch a period movie, they rarely would ever show glass as a window for that. but there were quite a few glass windows that had been found from that time period. Now, they wouldn't be clear like what we think of today oftentimes. They would usually be kind of a cloudy glass, but it still would let light in, right? And would protect you. So references in literary works, depiction of wall paintings at this time attest to the considerable attention of the new phenomenon of glass became widespread. And again, you can kind of get an idea of just how they were mass producing these pieces. Those are a little bit more cruder forms, but then they were also making very fine pieces as well. So it was a major high temperature industry, and they had considerable demands on resources such as fuel, which they would have to bring in. So they have found quite a bit of waste from the secondary workshops, but still finding the primary production sites like they did in Jerusalem. Those have still been fairly rare. The biggest ones that they have found have been on roads with the Greek and then with Jerusalem. Okay, and here's some from a Roman shipwreck. So that was found off the coast of Italy. And that's the thing too, a lot of times when you have shipwrecks, they can be very well maintained. And that's the thing with archaeology in general. Like in Malta, everything was very well preserved because it was dry. It was, it was an arid climate. So you didn't have the high humidity. So a lot of things found were still in really good shape. Study of Roman glass provide a unique window into the past. Through its impact, new technologies and materials can be seen, as well as the choices made about what was useful in their life. Because they were going to make out of glass what they realized that they were going to need. So they came to realize, hey, it's easier for us to blow glass and make cups, and they are better than if we use them just of different materials. This is Pompeii. So this is kind of an important part because, again, what I was talking about, the preservation, because Pompeii was covered in ash, it actually did help preserve the site very well. So this would have been 79 AD, and that would have been Mount Vesuvius when it had erupted. And then they went in and excavated some of it, and this would be a small furnished room. It was built around a larium, so it's a room of worship. And it had decorations of birds and plants. And then archaeological digs, they found 4 different rooms. So what you're going to see here is it's kind of like a table, and they have some pieces on there. And some of those are glass, like the one you'll see in front, blue. Again, that's a cobalt glass. And what's interesting is on that far side of the picture, you're going to see that same piece. And oftentimes when you're working on archaeological sites, you'll see these pieces and they'll be in fragments, so you got to be careful as you remove them to make sure you don't break them and try to keep everything intact as possible. And then like with the different tools, this would be the type of tool you'd be using. So as you start, a lot of times you start digging, you might remove a layer with a shovel, but as you get farther down, you're going to use tools like trowels to carefully remove it. And as you're running into artifacts, and that's the time when you're getting out brushes, even toothbrushes, and small picks to remove that, because you got to be very careful because a lot of it can be very fragile. That's like I did a lot of work with ceramics. Ceramics can be extremely fragile, especially like the Native American ceramics in humid environments. And this is an interesting thing too. So the lava flow was so hot that it actually turned part of the brains of some of the people into like a glass-like substance as well too. So that's kind of a wild thing. And then these are some of the glass vessels that are found in Pompeii. And you can see they had high quality glass vessels they were finding. And again, they were so well preserved because the ash was covering them over. But you might wonder, it's like, well, if a volcano explodes, you think the volcanic ash is going to melt in the glass. Well, it depends on the heat of the ash whenever it would fall on that. Because if it's already cooled down a little bit, it's going to actually layer it and buffer it from getting melted. But if the hot ash hits the glass, then this is what's going to happen. And see, they found both styles of the glass like this, so you could find some that were melted pretty badly. So it just depended on how hard it got hit. And then this is what I was telling you about the glass windows. So this is an example of what the glass windows look like in Pompeii. So it's kind of a cool thing, and it's not something people always will think of in ancient times like that.
So was that intentional? In other words, they made it like we make obscure glass now, or had they not just refined the process of making it clear?
It was, so they had started to get better with the clear glass, but again, the clear glass was something they're going to more do for a fine vessel. These, I think they were trying to more get them done kind of in mass production to be able to do that, because it was so much
So
more.
regardless of the outcome, we're just going to make a piece of glass.
We're going to make a piece of glass. So you're still going to let some light in that way. Yeah. I'm sure there were some examples of places that did have the more clear glass, but again, it's like what nowadays you're going to pay what you get for. So if you want to pay them 10 times as much, they would
Right.
probably try to refine and make it better.
Because it's about time in the process.
Yeah, because that is that similar time period, like with the Egyptian vessels I was showing you, where they were very clear. The
I could see
the Alexandria glass was very clear, but because that was such a time-consuming thing to get to that, for this, I think they just wanted to
on
get
that scale, the glass still
this.
bigger for
It's
the window.
it's hard, and a lot of times too, you'll see the glass can be different thicknesses as well, so it's kind of hard to even get them to be uniform pieces.
Right.
Yeah, but it's amazing they were even able to do it.
Yeah, back then, exactly.
Yeah, so it is pretty cool technique. Okay, and then, so now we kind of go up through time a little bit. So now we're to the time period in Venice. And Venice, and specifically the island of Murano, becomes very well known for glass production. Now what happens is, because a lot of that glass production I was talking about was in like Lebanon, Turkey, that kind of area, where a lot of that spread out from, a lot of the top glass artists by this time period were living in Turkey. And what happened is that the Doge of Venice, which would basically be the king of Venice, he takes the Turkish glassblowers and he tells them to come to Venice. But I mean, he kind of tricked them in a little bit of a way too, because he wanted to control glass production of all the fine glass artists. And he puts them onto the island of Murano. So there was a fire in Venice. It would have been in 1291, and it was a significant fire. And so they realized, okay, we're doing glass blowing, we have glass kilns, this is kind of dangerous. So let's kind of put this onto one island so we can control everything there. And what's interesting is that some of the top glass artists that still exist today, like Lino Tagliaferri, he'd be a person who helped teach Del Chihuly how to do blown glass. And he's one of the featured artists in the museum. They go back to that time period, his family. So there's a lot of families in there that are generation after generation that were doing glass work. And the thing is too, whenever you have those families for generations and they're all kind of working with each other, they develop new techniques, and really they turn from glass then from being utilitarian to the art form that we see today with it as well. So that's why Murano glass, you'll see as far as collecting, it's definitely one of the more expensive ones you'll see. So here we see some of the paintings of Murano. And then here's what Murano looks like today. You go there. And then we have Murano glass from several different artists on display at the museum. And then also we even have it in our retail store. Okay, then we'll get to some kind of the inventions that were very important for glass. So eyeglasses during the 12th and 13th century, monks began to use curved chunks of glass to increase the ease of reading and working with manuscripts. Italian glassmakers took this one step further by producing glass lenses adjoined by wire. So it's the first spectacles. And you'll see they kind of build upon that then. So the microscope in the 1590s, Hans and Zacharias Janssen, Dutch spectacle makers, experimented with inline double lenses in hopes of magnification. This led to the father and son duo inventing the first modern microscope. Today, this is, of course, very important. And then from microscope, you make an obvious jump to telescope. So about 20 years later, again, a Dutch scientist furthered the exploration of lenses, inventing the first modern telescope. And then in 1610, Galileo used that to observe Jupiter's orbiting moons, and then that changed what we thought about the solar system. Then we go ahead a little bit. Here's another one that's kind of surprised is fiberglass. A lot of people might think that is a more modern invention, but it actually goes back to 1887. Scientists from the Royal College of Science experimented and developed the first fiberglass. Today, fiberglass is used in a myriad of arenas, from the frames of our cars to the insulation of our homes, and of course, optic cables. Boats would also be another one too that people are very familiar with. Smartphone. So modern smartphones, tablets, computers rely on the glass screen, so Gorilla Glass. And then all of these iterations of glass applications fall under the realm of utilitarianism. And then that takes us up to the studio glass art movement. So glass has been in the hands of humans for about 4,000 years. However, it wasn't until really the mid-20th century that a revolutionary art movement known as the studio glass art movement emerged. This movement redefined glass, allowing artists to harness the potential of glass as a creative medium and allowing glass to be defined as an art. So who led the glass art movement? The first one would be one that most of you probably have heard of, and that's Dale Chihuly. He's often considered the face of the studio glass movement. He's celebrated for his groundbreaking sculptures that transcend traditional boundaries of glass art. Chihuly's works marry organic shapes and vibrant colors, drawing inspiration from the natural world. His large-scale installations, such as the famous glass chandelier Bellagio in Las Vegas, showcase his ability to transform glass into otherworldly creations to capture light and movement.
Depth perception.
Yeah, I know it's very
You know what I'm
difficult.
saying? You
Yeah,
have depth perception with one eye.
absolutely.
Blow the glass and make it like that.
And he actually had, that was not glass related, it's from an accident he had. So yeah, so
Splatter from the fire.
most people assume he got hurt with glass, but yeah, he actually had been in a accident. Harvey Littleton is often referred to as the father of studio glass, as he played a crucial role in developing glass blowing techniques that could be practiced in smaller and more personal studios rather than industrial factories. And that's one of the things too, is that with each one of these glass artists that I'm talking about, we do have pieces at the museum by them that are on display. Littleton's workshops and teachings laid the foundation for the studio glass movement by making glass art accessible to individual artists. So before Littleton, people were doing these like in kind of larger factory settings really. Now in the older workshops where we're looking at like with the Romans, those were smaller workshops. But as we progress through time, like within Murano, then we're getting into bigger workshops. Well, what Littleton did is he kind of reduced the size of a kiln. He made it where you could be doing glass work in a room smaller than this. So that was important. So he kind of miniaturized it. And then Dominic Labino, he is a physicist and artist, collaborated with Littleton to develop glass formulas and furnace designs that were suitable for small-scale studios. Their collaboration revolutionized the art form, allowing artists to experiment and create their own creative spaces. And then Marvin Lepofsky and Fritz Dreisbeck. And then these are, and I'll show you actually, this one's really cool, is because he makes a little truck. That one is on display in the museum on the first floor, so something to look for. Very talented artist. So their explorations in abstract and subcultural forms helped shape the aesthetic of the movement. Again, energetic and humorous approach to glass blowing, and inject a sense of playfulness into the medium. And this is Bechtova and Lebedinsky. So this is a very important part of it, and you'll see a lot of actually Czech artists did a lot of big glass work. It's hard to tell the scale of this piece that's in there, but that piece would actually be like this tall. And it weighs, I've helped pick it up before. It's like 500 pounds. I mean, it's massive. And some of the pieces of the Czech artists have built in there, and there's some, we have a lot of other European and Asian artists, but the Czech are really known for making big pieces. Oftentimes they'll weigh 700 or 800 pounds. And what's interesting, because when you take glass out of a mold, you have to put it through an annealing process. So you just can't pull it out and then set it aside because it'll blow up. So what they have to do, they gradually take down the temperature. And for pieces that big, it can take them months to cool it down properly. Because the artist never knows if it's going to be good or not till they take it out of the mold and then start to cool it down and make sure it doesn't crack. Because if it cracks, it's done, right? Yeah, then you got to start over. That's why also big pieces of glass that are art pieces can be very expensive for collectors. And then these are two of the most well-known. And they actually, Pitchlock School in Washington, they taught there as well. And then a lot of the glass artists that you see in America today would have either studied with them or they studied with people they trained. So that's where you get a lot of that connection. And then the same is true from Italian glassmakers. A lot of them came over as well. And this is the last one, William Morris. He's a little bit more of a modern one. He actually does a lot of kind of a Native American, highly stylized, very vibrant colored pieces. But he's also on display on the first floor. So the thing that they all shared was vision, determination, and curiosity. And here's some of the different types of glass techniques that you're going to see at the museum. So this is blown glass.
How do they make the different colors in the blown glass?
It's the way that they are working the glass as they go, and they're twisting the glass. Sometimes they'll do what they call cane work as well, where they're taking different colors of glass and they'll mix it around. Yeah, and then again with the frit, like I was talking about, that will add colors. This is hot sculpted glass, so this is where you're heating up a chunk of glass. So you're doing a gather of that, and then you're going to, and here you'll get an idea of them adding some color. Here, I'll play this for you if I can get it to play. It's not going to play the sound, but I can explain to what they're doing. So this is a big clump or gather that they've just taken out of the kiln, and then while it's still hot, they can do a little bit of work on it. This is actually the artist Martin Blank, and the piece that he's working on is on display at the museum. And it's on the second floor, so it's a major installation.
Pretty good chunk of glass.
That's a big chunk of glass. And there he's putting it into the frit, and that's making color. See that blue? So that's like into cobalt mineral. And then the other thing he's doing there is he's putting silver leaf on it. So he's putting it right over top. And you'll see a lot of silver and golden leaf. And so that's another way to make so there's different ways you can make the color.
So it's an artist technique.
It's an artist technique, exactly. And that's the thing too, once you've put that color into the glass, that color's in the glass. Yeah. So if you're not gonna, you're never gonna change it. Yeah, so that's the thing is that a lot of times when I have the glass blowers doing presentations or demos outside, they're using a clearer glass so they can rework it and make it into something else too. Because if they go with a color, then they got to stick with that color. But sometimes they'll do a frit or something on it just to show that technique, to show how you do it. But yeah, there you can really get an idea of the silver leaf work that they're doing. But yeah, that guy's a very fine artist, Martin Blank. He's one of the top cast glass artists in the world for sure. And you see how that's everything you can do. If you even don't want to put it back fully into the kiln, you can tell he was there using the torch.
Yeah,
so yeah, you could heat up certain, exactly, you spot heat it and you can maybe bend that one piece, right? Okay, this is flameboard glass. This is from Paul Stankard. He's also considered to be the top kind of paperweight artist in the world. And what's interesting about this is every one of those elements is made of glass. Wow. And I'll show you a quick little video too of him making this. So this is just going to be him making a flower. And what you saw with that one with the bees, we actually have one in the collection that I had on display actually out at the Tampa airport about a year ago. And it was like a ball like this big, so bigger than a paperweight. And it had a swarm of bees. It's like 30 bees, and it is a really cool one. Yeah, it's a pretty well priceless piece. So what he does is what you call flame working. And you can also see this at the museum too when I do the art fairs. I usually do them on the third Friday, but this month, because of the holidays, it's going to be, and there again, he's doing frit. So he's adding color to it. And what he's doing is making flower. So you're going to be seeing him make petals for the flower. And for some people, it can look like what he's doing is easier, but this is a very difficult process, because if you hold that flame too long, even a second too long, you could totally destroy the whole piece you were just working on. So you have to be very, very patient, and you have to have very steady hands. But yeah, he's a very accomplished artist. And at the museum, we have the largest collection of Paul Stankert's pieces, I would say, on display anywhere in the world. But you can see kind of those different techniques he's doing where he's going to make this. Yeah, very talented. And that flame is very hot. So you're talking, 2,000 plus degrees, they will get these torches going up to.
It's funny you say, I've heard them say that glass artists have better hands than surgeons.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah, you have to be of that quality. And there's a lot of very fine glass artists that are in the area. Chuck Books would be one, Marlena Rose, Duncan McClellan. Those are some of the most well-known glass artists in the United States, actually live in this area, in St. Petersburg, Tampa area. Susan Gott would be another one. She'll actually be the featured artist at our holiday party on the 13th coming up, too.
The one that makes the Christmas ornaments?
She does make some crystal ornaments, but she's more known for her big cast glass pieces.
She's not a teacher, is she?
Well, you can take classes with her. So like,
No, I mean like a teacher.
no, she's not a teacher. She does teach. She does teach glass art at her studio, though. Like most of these artists will do that. They have studios, and you can go there and take glass classes with them. Synergy Glass by Us is another one that does that. They do the glass blowing with me. So you do have the opportunity to learn from a lot of top glass artists in this area, and that's why they actually call this part of Florida the Glass Coast, around St. Petersburg. Yeah, so there you can see his kind of that finished flower. And that's just one element of it. Then laminated glass. These are very beautiful. We have several of those pieces at the museum. So those are different sections of glass that they're connecting together. Some of them create an optical illusion to where you can see one image on it, and they can have it painted and they have it laminated, and you'll walk around and the image will disappear from that. So that's a very neat thing to see. This is cast glass. This is Karen Lamont. Again, this is hard to tell the scale. That's a full-size dress. It's huge, yep. That's the second most viewed piece in the museum, actually. And we have the largest collection of Karen Lamont kimonos anywhere in the world, and that's in the first gallery of the museum. This is sand cast glass. That's the technique I was talking about in the beginning, where you pour glass into sand. That's how you would make that design. I'll skip over that video. It's a long one. This is sand carved or sand blasted glass. It's like using a sandblaster you might be familiar with. This is a very difficult technique because, again, it's like with the flame. You hold it too long. You hold the sandblaster too long, you're going to destroy your piece. So you got to be careful. This is pot de verre. You can think of this as more like say a plaster of Paris or something like that, because this actually starts as a granulated sand, and then you mix it, and then they'll put it into a mold. So what's interesting is like all those berries on there, the bugs, those are all molded into that. And that's on display at the museum too. Here's a quick little video. That's a piece by Tim Tate right there. This video is cool here. This kind of shows you the inside of the museum, some of the pieces. It's a honeycomb glass. Yeah. Yeah, that's the most one of the most common shots you'll see from the museum. Yeah, you see that all over. That's the Martin Blank piece in the room. Yeah, we have it marked out on the floor where you need to stand to do that. There's the Stanker, and there's Oki. And then we do scavenger hunts for the kids in there. Yeah, those are really cool too. Okay. And then...
Dangerous, you scavenger hunt with kids in glass.
Well, so there's there's an Imagine Museum in Washington, and we're Imagine Museum of Contemporary Glass Art. That's a kids museum. We're a glass museum, but we used to be called that building used to be called the Imagine School, so it made sense for glass to be Imagine Museum. But the thing is, yeah, they are fragile, but then of course you have a parent accompanying them, and all you do is you just side out the glass. It's not that you go pick them up, right? Because
Very hard scavenger hunt, I've done it.
it's easy.
Space people standing around on a sculpture.
The idea is that any age kid could come in and do it that way.
And learn.
Yeah, and learn. And actually, the idea of the scavenger hunt is really just to get you to look at the pieces more closely. This is the number one piece in the museum. This is the isodecahedron. You also see this piece featured in the movie The Glass Onion. So Anthony James is the guy who made this. And if you ever get a chance to look at it, you want to kind of look at each area because you can see into infinity when you look into that. So it's very cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah. So then, yep, we have tours and all kinds of events. We're actually now behind the Dolly, the second most visited art museum in the St. Petersburg area. All right, so thank you. Thank you. And then if anybody else has, so all the time. So I will actually be doing a major exhibition change coming up here in January and February for a few of the galleries where there'll be complete gallery changes. But I'm always changing at least something every Monday. So a few people, like yesterday I did some changes too. I did a couple pieces, but that most of the time that's what it is. It can be just a few pieces. And I'm the executive director, but I'm also the curator. But then I also have a staff that works with me and with the founder to try to decide what we want to get in. Again, I was saying we have 5,000 pieces in the collection and can only have 500 on display. So we try to rotate them through so it's a new experience because we want it to be if they come back a year later, they see something different. But also we have a lot of members and they come back every month and we like for them to see something every different time.
At least a piece or
Yeah, at least a piece. Because we have 22 galleries. So it is a museum where you can spend a lot of time, and it's nice to see something a little bit different every time you come. And that's why I try to do a lot of different events. And a lot of the events I do are discounted or free for members, and that way they can come see the museum in different ways too. And they have like music nights and poetry readings and artist lectures. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Yeah.
I was just curious, was there a certain reason there's a lot of glass blowers in the St. Pete Tampa area, or it just happened?
Not cold.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the weather is nice here, and just there were a lot of them that were from the Florida area too originally, and yeah, it's a nice place. And then a lot of those top glass artists that I know are kind of friends as well. So there's community, and then they've taught their apprentices to do it, and it's kind of continued on from there. Because that's a big part of it. So a lot of the glass artists that I work with at the market, for example, or the art festivals, say they studied with Duncan McClellan or they had worked at the Morian before. So there's a lot of interconnection. A lot of the glass artists know each other. Kind of a similar way in archaeology. A lot of the people know each other who are in that field. But I think that's been a big draw for it. And there's a lot of places where you can go and do glass classes, whether it be glass blowing or flame work in the area. So it is a nice place for gallery, but also, yeah, the weather definitely helps too. Yeah. Yeah, over here.
So, we've been to Imagine many times.
Uh-huh.
You have an on-premise glass blowing studio?
So what it is, we do a glass blowing studio whenever it is on the art markets because we don't have a physical space inside the building because we don't have enough space because we use up all the space.
Right.
But that's what I was saying on the third Friday, but this time it's on this Friday because of the holidays. You can see glass blowing or you can see flame working. It'll usually be either one of the two or both. But yeah, we just don't have the space for it.
Okay.
But then what it is, Synergy Glass or Duncan McClellan Glass, they will bring their portable unit over and do it. And if you sign a waiver, you can actually do it. Yeah, you can try to do it yourself, which is very cool. I mean, it's a good opportunity.
Because the Moran, you can sit there and
Yeah, they're,
It's on,
exactly. They have a dedicated space where they do one there.
okay. I was gonna
And then actually a lot, yeah, the more in, a lot of those glass artists actually also do things with Imagine Museum. Like last night, one of them did a lecture. They're also involved with the markets and involved with doing the glass blowing. But yeah, we don't have a separate building where we're able to do that. Yeah, maybe someday. We do actually have that whole block though, basically, that we own. That's why the parking lot there we own. You have free parking. It's on Central, so we're kind of lucky as far as the size of the place that we do have.
And is that where the market is?
That's where the market is, in the parking lot. Yeah, and it's 5 to 9 p.m. is when we do that. Yeah, Halloween's always the biggest one every year that we do. But yeah,
You had mentioned that the first glass they found was from a meteor.
yeah, meteor hitting, yeah, in Libyan desert.
I'm wondering, in places where there are volcanoes like Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius,
Mm-hmm.
there's silica in the surrounding ground.
Yes.
Is there glass found inside, for example, lava tubes that tourists go through?
That's a good question. I would have to look about that, but I would say there would definitely be a chance that could be, because there is naturally forming glass as well. So I think that's a pretty good chance.
Isn't that what obsidian is?
Well, obsidian is like it's a rock. So it's,
But it's glass-like rock.
yeah, it's a glass-like rock. And I've actually found on Native American sites I've worked on quite a few obsidian blades and then also arrowheads made out of obsidian. I actually found what they call, this is an interesting one, I found a Shoshone Point, which was a Western tribe, but it was actually found in Illinois, which is where I'm from, nearby, because I worked in the Cahokia Mounds region, and that was actually the largest Native American city in North America. It had a population of anywhere between 100 to 200,000 people in 1100 AD, and it kind of shows the trade, because obsidian would have been found farther out west, but they were trading with Midwestern tribes, so there was a lot of back and forth through that. But yeah, you can find the naturally forming glass in different places. Yep. Does that answer it okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Any, yeah, any other question? Do you have a question? Okay. All right, well,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Yep.